Okay, hi everyone, and welcome to this event on digital organising for UCU activists. My name is Nick Hardy, and I work in UCU head office in the General Secretary's office, but I used to be a member in higher education. I was on the branch committee at Birmingham UCU and also the National Executive Committee. We're going to have three sections of this event, basically covering three different areas of how you can do online campaigning, particularly under lockdown. So the first section is going to be with Ed Bailey, who is our Deputy Head of Campaigns at UCU head office, and with James Richards, who is the Vice President of Heriot Watt branch. So we're really pleased to have James joining us in particular because
James is an incredibly experienced member when it comes to those of you who are in the know will probably Heriot Watt consistently gets the best ballot results in industrial ballots of pretty much any branch, and James is a large part of the engine room of that operation. So we're going to be hearing from them, and then we're going to move on to a session on social media in particular, and that's going to be led by Nathan Gale, who is our relatively new press officer here at UCU head office, and with David White, who's the Vice President of Liverpool UCU. And David is involved at the moment in a local campaign to defend all jobs, with a lot of precariously employed colleagues in particular under attack at Liverpool UCU. So solidarity with Liverpool UCU, and I imagine we'll be hearing from David about what they've been doing to mobilise members behind that campaign at the moment. And then finally, we will have a quick session with me and Claire Maris, who's a member at UCU City University of London branch and on the National Executive Committee. We're going to be talking about a new service that UCU has been using for the first time to do digital campaigning and organising, and that's a peer-to-peer text messaging service called ThroughText. So if you're interested in the sound of that, please hang on until the end of this event where we'll be talking about that. We will have, just from a housekeeping point of view, we'll have opportunities for questions and comments, which we'd invite you to put during the event, throughout the event. We'll try to cover some of them as they come in during each section, but if you've got general comments and questions, we'll try to cover what we can at the very end of the event. I'm just going to put a notice, and if you post them via any platform, we'll be able to see all of them and bring them up on screen if we've got time to answer them. And the other thing to say is that in terms of captions, you should be able to activate captions if you're watching this via Facebook. And there will also be a YouTube recorded version available after the event with captions added to that as well. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Ed and James, if you guys are ready to talk about email, and then the rest of us will join you later in the session. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Nick. As Nick said, I'm Ed Bailey from the National Campaigns team based at headquarters. Hopefully I should know one or two of you watching, so I look forward to seeing you again face to face very soon. I'm going to be talking about how the National Union uses email to organise from a national perspective. I'll talk about the softwares that we use and also a few top tips for using email to organise in your trade union branch. And then, as Nick mentioned, I'll hand over to James, who has actually been awarded prizes for trade union organising from UCU Scotland and the Scottish TUC. And Heriot Watt managed to smash the Tory trade union ballot thresholds and get one of the highest turnouts in a UCU ballot, mainly using email. So email might be seen as a kind of somewhat dry and perhaps old-fashioned medium of communication when compared to some of the other platforms we're talking about today, such as Twitter and WhatsApp, but I'd like to make a case for email still being an extremely useful tool for trade union organising, and particularly in terms of getting the vote out in trade union ballots, which is so important at the moment with the Trade Union Act requirement of a ballot threshold. So some of the advantages of using email, we have high coverage in UCU. It's a fairly universal thing. Most people in our sector get provided with an email address when they start, and they're often able to access their email messages during the working days. So we have very good coverage when compared to a lot of trade unions. So we're at an advantage in that sense. It's especially for communicating with important or statutory information that you need to be sure that everyone receives. So many of our members still resist Twitter and Facebook, and you know, there are concerns about data and privacy. But you know, we respect that, and we want to make sure that those members still get all the key information. We can also be reasonably confident that emails are confidential and secure, and so useful for trade union activities such as voting in e-ballots, personal casework, or indeed inviting colleagues to join. They're easy to manage and administer, so we can easily update and maintain contact lists, keep our lists up to date, and also measure open rates, and we can see how many people click through to the links that we send. We can spot problems and change our strategy to improve engagement, as well as looking at things like frequency of emailing that I'll talk about later, and scheduling as well. So what times we send emails. They're creating clear and attractive communications. It doesn't have to just be text in an email now. We can use images, branding, and embedded content to create attractive email communications. We can use templates so that our emails are consistent, and we can branded with the house style. We can also add attachments and links, and some platforms such as Outlook allow us to add survey questions or link in with video conferencing and so on. Another advantage of using email in your trade union organising is record keeping. So emails are useful in our dealings with employers and in handling casework, because we can keep a record of what's been said, when and by who. It's worth remembering that this works both ways, though. So we should be careful of what we say in an email, and sometimes a telephone call is better, as many of us have found out the hard way. So those are some of the advantages of email, and how UCU uses email nationally. Now, it starts off with our membership database. So members provide us with email addresses when they join up. They have the option of selecting a preferred email address that we contact them on. This is held on the UCU database and can be updated at any time by members themselves using the My UCU portal, which is you can get to via our website. And we rely on members keeping their own information up to date. We periodically ask members to check their details and update it, especially prior to any big national ballots, where we want to make sure all our details are up to date. Obviously, the way we hold information on members and about members is covered by data protection law. Branches will have a nominated membership officer, and that's an important role for liaising with HQ and our membership team, keeping records up to date, especially when we have ballots and elections, and turnout is so important these days. So keeping that up to date is fairly crucial. Nationally, we use an email management software, and and that helps us create professional looking and consistent messages. Also allows us to target different segments of members as well. So, for example, if we wanted to send a message to just members in a certain branch or members on a certain contract type, it might be a message about casualisation or some of those issues. So we want to just email members on a fixed term contract. We can do that or demographics such as ethnicity. We can target and segment our membership in that way using the software. As I mentioned, we also use emails for e-ballots and elections and surveys that I'm sure you're familiar with, both using and receiving. And we use this to collect information offered to us by members as well. So James will talk a little bit more about that. People replying saying that they voted and using it in a get the vote out campaign. Recruitment as well, we use email for sometimes. We're able to use lists of staff in a college or university, a list of their emails, and we're able to contact eligible staff and invite them to join by email. Now, it depends on the recognition agreement that your branch will have with your employer on whether or not you're provided with that information. So some UCU branches receive lists of eligible staff or indeed new members, so they get notified when new staff start work at the college or university. But it's always worth checking your employer's email usage policy and making sure that we don't want anyone to get into trouble via the use of email. And if you're not sure, talk to your regional office about that. So that's how we use email from the national office. Just a few tips before I hand you over to James. So a few top tips for trade union organising with email that I've picked up during my time with UCU. As I mentioned, keeping contact details up to date. It's not the sexiest part of trade union organising, but I think it's very important. And everything we do as a union relies on our ability to reach fellow workers. And one of the primary ways we do this is via email. So we can't get people to meetings or on picket lines if we can't get in contact with them. So it's a really important thing, is keeping that data up to date. And it can be an organising tool as well. When I first started as a Unison branch secretary, the first thing I was asked to do was go around and check everyone's details were up to date. And I thought, well, it's not really what I got involved for, but actually it was a great way of meeting people and finding out what their issues were. So it's actually, I think it's a really crucial and fundamental part of training and organising. So keep those details up to date and encourage your members to maintain their own details through the My UCU portal as well. Another tip is keep it simple. Attention spans are very short. We're all very busy, so a lot of the time we only have time to scan the headline and then often press delete. So not everyone is as immersed and interested in some of this stuff as we are, obviously. So keep it simple, keep it short, remove acronyms and jargon and unnecessary text, then go through it all and do that again. I think you can't stress this enough, how important it is to keep things simple and clear. Also keep it positive as well, keep your messages positive and emphasise the fact that workers can make a difference, rather than listing all the negatives about the situation. You're more likely to get to the end of an email and take the action if they feel that there are positive alternatives. So keep it positive, and also avoid overkill. Now, I realise this might sound a bit rich coming from HQ, because I think we've got better, but I recognise that there's a lot of email traffic that comes from the centre. We don't always get it right. So this is as much a reminder for me as for anyone else, that especially at busy times, during ballots, we do hammer people with reminders to vote and so on. I mean, this is important stuff, and there's so much going on in our workplaces and there's lots to say, but it can be a case of diminishing returns. And if we overload our members with emails, they will switch off and they'll unsubscribe as well. So we'll then lose the chance to engage with them for the important battles facing us. So avoid overkill, keep it positive and keep it simple, and keep those contact details up to date. And with that, I will hand you over to James, who's going to talk a bit about his experience using email to organise locally at Heriot-Watt. James?
Thanks, Ed. Is it okay if you put up my slides, if that's possible?
Yeah, doing that now.
Obviously, thanks to Nick for the intros. Yeah, I'll probably talk just while that's actually happening. As you'll probably be aware, I've been asked by UCU just to kind of give a quick presentation about using email at our branch, and in particular how it helped with GTVO. So hopefully you can see these slides okay, but if not, we'll get them distributed later on, and I will probably not talk as much as there's information on the slides, so they will be worthwhile having a look through afterwards, but nothing too onerous. So I provided about 5 slides, but there's only 3 that I'm really going to talk around. There's my contact details, so please feel free to get in touch after this presentation if you want to hear a little bit more information. Can we have the next slide, please, Ed? So just first of all, a bit of broader context. I think it's important to note that I've been in academia now for around about 17 years. I've quite a bit of form with email. I work remotely, not just under COVID, and used email as a big part of my job in terms of organising dissertations and supervisors and research ethics, and used it quite extensively on my own research. I was one of the first people to use electronic surveys about 15 years ago. So I've kind of got used to organising my work and getting things done remotely in one sense of the word. But I was president 2015 to 2018, and one of the kind of things that I was told in a handover was I should try and contact my membership frequently, and email was the main way in which to do that. So I've had quite a lot of practice, if you like, in terms of emailing members, and that has continued since I became the vice president in 2018. And as I mentioned before, just to kind of go over it just one more time, our branch has topped the table, if you like, on GTVO on 3 occasions in the last few years. And ultimately what this presentation about is how absolutely central email was to that, although there are plenty of other things that need to be said as well, and they'll be covered in other parts of the broader presentation. Can we have the next slide, please, Ed? So just a few general points. There's about 12, I think, on there. I'm not going to talk and go through every single one, and the list is in no particular order. What I think is important to note, and it's kind of been touched on already, is that for many of you, email will seem to be as quite an outdated and kind of almost prehistoric kind of electronic tool. It's only been around for about 20 or so years. Plenty of other things have come along in the meantime, but it remains the most common tool by which we use as employees, and certainly in terms of how we stay in touch with our members. Email is, as has been kind of indicated already, it's extraordinarily versatile, and I can only claim to have perhaps only dabbled slightly with its versatility, but I feel that I've come a little bit further than perhaps just sending out emails without any real kind of deep thought about what I could achieve from this as well. So, based on evidence as well, I think it's very clear that email can lead to substantial change, not least the fact that we managed to organise very heavily, and Heriot-Watt University is very much aware of how very well organised we are, particularly when it comes to industrial action ballots. I think they pretty much know that if there's going to be a ballot, that Heriot-Watt will be involved in that, and I think that's an important part of the broader bargaining capacity of our branch more locally. So I'll just kind of pull out about 3 or 4 things I think that really stand out from the general points. Just to kind of say it one more time, because it's so important. Pretty much all our members use it, so it has to be at the top of the list in terms of how we organise. I think it's important to set out email so not in every instance, but it needs to be set up so it kind of at least to some sort of two-way dialogue. It's not just you as a branch official letting your members know something. You don't want to perhaps go over the top, but it needs to be set up more broadly so that your membership will speak back to you in some shape or form, because their feedback is really important in terms of what you do with how you carry on as a branch, but also it really is important. And I think members need to be able to reply to say whether they support something, they have other ideas to offer, or maybe they object in some kind of way. I mean, aside from the email itself, which can take time, of course, because I think a good email is crafted and needs some thought and needs to be not to perhaps be sent out too prematurely or too, perhaps too reactionary as well, because you may say something that you might later regret in some kind of way. But as far as we were concerned as a branch, a key issue really is that in terms of reaching members, it's very low labour intensive. And we have over the years used door knocking and leafleting and sending all sorts of things through the post, etc., things like that. Those things take an awful amount of time. They should be done, but email is clearly very different from all of them in terms of the fact that at the click of a button, every single member in your branch can get a communication. Can I just have the final and penultimate slide, rather? So just to kind of say something specifically on GTVO, and there's an illustration on this slide that some of you may have seen before, but if you can't see it very clearly, it's effectively a line that demonstrates our turnout in a ballot that we had, the pay inequality ballot at the end of 2018. The little blue squares that you might maybe just be able to make out, they were emails that were sent out, and the line going across the screen from left to right is the turnout, and the black line that's vertical is the 50% threshold. And the X scale, if you like, is the time. I think it was 6 or 7 weeks in total. And there are a few other little symbols in there as well that suggest that email wasn't the only thing that we used to kind of organize our members. We did include attachments with emails. You might see a little green symbol there around about week 4. The people who we knew hadn't voted at that point, we left them voicemails on a Sunday afternoon just to remind them to vote. And there's a few other things along the way. There's business cards and postcards that we used as well. So that's kind of give you an idea. I think around about 8 emails were sent out in that ballot window, but on a relatively regular basis. You might notice as well that we didn't go too heavy early on. And that was really because we knew that people needed time to get their heads around and didn't want to hassle people too early. We knew from previous ballots around about 30% of our members would vote within the first few weeks. It was really a matter of, sitting out for a few weeks, some gentle reminders, and then after about 3 or 4 weeks, we began to kind of intensify the campaign, if you like. So there's a range of things on there. I think it's just general information that we have an all kind of member closed email list that we use on a frequent basis. When we download information from the national database, we have individual emails as well. And one of the things that we did was this so-called vote counting, which I won't go into any depth right now, but we effectively sent out individual emails asking people to reply if they had voted, and if it was a yes, we would note that number and keep the information of those who hadn't voted and email them after another 5, 6, 7 days just to see whether they'd actually voted. And as you can see, it led to a very high turnout, and it worked again when we used it just at the end of last year. So other things I think worth mentioning that are in here as well is that I think emails was really important in the sense that the ballot was about a grievance to do with pay, to do with a range of equality issues. It was useful to use the email in a sense to kind of sync in many ways with the national emails, which were sending out broad messages. But with email, we could, in a sense, refresh those grievances, localize those grievances. There was a couple of cases where we found information that suggested, whilst our university was unsupportive of our grievance, was going ahead with a range of things that contradicted that stance. So we used the email in a sense to refresh and localize the grievances, and it's impossible to know the extent of the impact of each individual email. All we can go off is the response rate in terms of the people who said they voted. And the vote rate kept on going up, and the final turnout in this instance of 64% was predicted within 1%, and the same was the case in the 2017 and the 2019 ballot as well. I mean, this broader session is obviously not just about email, and I think it's important to note that whilst we believe that email is central to all of this, I think the key is this term density of communications. It's important that all branches have a range and means of which to communicate with members. Email perhaps should be central to that, but social media and more physical forms of communication are absolutely central as well. And I think that helps because it reinforces the message, but it's also the case that everybody gets to receive their information in a form or a manner that suits them in one sense of the word. So it's appealing to those as well. I think a few other kind of general tips was be careful with the use of humour, but I think humour should figure in some shape or form in your communications with your members. I think it's best to probably keep this relatively low level, relatively generic. I probably would, based on my experience, avoid too much cynicism or sarcasm, but things like irony or simple humour using emojis, etc., and things like that seem to have an effect. Certainly not measuring any kind of negative effect from that. Prepare your campaigns as well. What you can see in this depiction here is the ballot window. It's important that you send out emails, 1 to perhaps 2 weeks in advance to prepare the ground for balloting, so that people know for certain an envelope's going to be arriving wherever their designated delivery address is. And it's important as well, when the ballot window closes, that you follow up with several emails to effectively demobilize the campaign as well, and get people ready for what possibly might be the next stage. In the case in question here, we prepared ourselves for industrial action and won a ballot for it. But clearly, after this, we were in a position where no industrial action was going to happen. There was a reballot, so we had to come in there and comment on that in some shape or form to keep people coming with us, etc., and things like that. So regularity is important. I think perhaps 1 to 2 weeks is probably about right. And I think when you send your emails out is important to a certain extent. We all know the National HQ sends out emails on a Friday afternoon. We've found that sending out emails perhaps on a Sunday afternoon, which is obviously not ideal for your work-life balance or for your members, or first thing Monday morning, it means that this information arrives when people perhaps might be dipping into their emails at the weekends, and it might catch their attention more than if it arrived on a Wednesday afternoon. Similarly, if you send out an email first thing Monday morning at 8 o'clock, it'll be the first email that people will get on top of a pile, no doubt, that's been left over from the weekend or the end of the previous week. So that's just generally some of the points I kind of wanted to make. The two GDVO campaigns, the first two were principally run by myself, but the third time I did it jointly with a fellow organizer, Joss, and we did try something slightly different than I've mentioned here. We did use some survey software, but I could mention that in another kind of another context. But the main point I want to make from that is that two of us did that with the help of a third person, and it really was quite manageable, and it wasn't really too onerous, and we still managed to get the highest turnout, which was very nice to have in one sense of the word. So just to finish, just to flash up the last slide, if anybody's interested, there's a very short paper, 3 or 4 pages that I wrote on what we did at Heriot Watt in 2018. You can click on that and see the paper, and email figures very strongly in that. So that's my little bit.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ed. And thanks, James. That was really, really helpful.
Thank you, James.
we've had a couple of questions in already. We don't have loads of time. We need to move on to the next section, but I thought I would just ask one, which was, what software do you use for targeting emails? Is from Ben, and can branches use it?
The software we use is called Lyris, Lyris, and the short answer is no. Branches can't use the national Lyris software. You can, if you have funds, you can subscribe to it yourselves and use it in that way. There are other free software out there. So if you'd like some help finding an appropriate one or doing any kind of targeted messages, then do get in touch with us, Ben. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I'm going to move on now and ask, bye, Ed and James.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask Nathan and David to talk to us for a little bit about social media. Take it away.
Thank you, Nick. Afternoon, everyone. So my name's Nathan. I'm a press officer at UCU. I've been in the role a couple of months. Prior to that, I was an organiser for the Labour Party, and in that role, we would use social media extensively to support our campaigning objectives. I'm going to talk a bit about how you can use social media to support your campaign, and then David has kindly agreed to speak to us from University of Liverpool, UCU, about how they've used social media to support their campaign Defend All Jobs. So social media is a great tool to use. It allows you to communicate quickly with up to a global audience. Because of that, you do want to be careful about what you're posting, and I think the same rules that Ed said about emails apply to social media. Is what you're posting productive or positive? Does it conflict with any social media policies you have to follow? Is it revealing any confidential information? Are you going to be happy with anyone potentially seeing what you've written? And you want to make sure that your message, sorry David, do you mind turning off your mic for a second? You want to be careful that when you're, you want to make sure that you're not using any insider language or jargon, that your message is as authentic and interesting as possible. And it's always a good idea to have someone else read through something before you're going to post it. So when we're thinking about how we use social media to support our campaigning objectives, you want to have an idea of, so say your objective is stopping cuts at your local institution. You've got your decision makers that you want to be pressuring, so the Vice Chancellor or governing body of the institution. The audience then is everyone you can think of that can pressure those decision makers. And you want to map out how that audience can interact with your decision makers and how that you are able to use social media to reach that audience. So your audience is going to be UCU members, other staff, students, MPs, local councillors, journalists, community groups, local residents, the wider union movement. You really want to take the time to think through that audience. And then you want to think, what platforms are those audiences on that you can use to interact with them? And I'm just going to talk through some platforms. So Twitter is really key because the decision makers are going to be on Twitter, as are journalists, the institutions, MPs, local councillors. So you want to make sure that you're using it. Make sure you're using any relevant hashtags and atting any relevant institutions. And you can also use our UCU central account to amplify your tweets. So feel free to email us at press@ucu.org.uk and we can retweet stuff. We've got 50,000 followers, so it's good. It's a good account. It's a good resource to use. Instagram has a much younger audience than other social media platforms, but about a third of the UK population now has Instagram accounts. It's really good for communicating with younger audiences like students. You want to make sure your posts are as visual as possible for that platform. Facebook, over half of people in the UK are using Facebook every single day. So it needs to be a key part of your social media campaign. And when you're thinking about when you post on Facebook, you don't just want to be posting on the UCU UCU branch profile page, you also want to be thinking about which groups are your audiences using that you can post on to interact with them. So local community groups, local Labour Party pages are going to be good places to target as well. Reddit, often people don't think about using Reddit as a social media tool, but if you want, for example, to get people to sign a petition, there are going to be relevant subreddits that you can post on, and Reddit again has an active community, and people will be willing to carry out the actions you want. So there's socialism subreddits, education subreddits, UK university subreddits that you can be targeting. An application I've previously used is called Nextdoor. It's a neighbourhood hub, and local residents will use it to discuss things that are going on in their community. Again, it's a really active audience that you can think about interacting with if you want to build up a local community base to support your campaign. Lastly, WhatsApp. WhatsApp is a really great tool to use in a similar way to you can use emails. So you can broadcast your messages to your UCU members, for example, and ask them to complete actions for you. But you can also use it in a similar way to Facebook pages. You can find community groups that are on public WhatsApp accounts. So often, if you're on a Facebook group, they'll have a WhatsApp account as well that you can add and join. Currently, I'm in a COVID-19 mutual aid group. It's got over 1,000 members on, and people are using it to talk about political actions they're taking locally. So it's something to think about that you can use to reach the audiences you want to reach. Once you've thought through all the mediums you can use, all the platforms, and who the audiences are that are using them, you then want to be making your message as specific to that audience and platform as possible. So again, if you want people to sign a petition, if you're posting onto a local Facebook group, if it's a community group, you might want to make your post specific to what effect the cuts will have on the local community. Whereas where you're posting to a local Labour Party group, you might want to talk about it more in terms of what effect it will have on the trade union movement. And you always want to make sure that that message is as authentic and personal as possible to each platform and each group you're speaking with, because that's going to help to get people to do the action that you want. And a good way to make sure that you're using social media as productively as possible is when you are writing out your campaign grid. I would always have a row for each social media platform you're using, and each action you're taking on a given day. Think for the platform you're using. Can you use it to amplify that action? And that way, you're going to be using social media as much as possible to support the campaign. What I would also do is have an idea of what targets you want to get through the social media campaign. So it might be so many people engaging with a post, or so many people signing your petition. And then at the end of each week, use those targets that you've created for yourself to assess what went well and what could have gone better, and then use that to adjust the grid for next week. And that's going to help you improve how you're using social media throughout your campaign. I think I'll end there. I hope that was useful. I'm going to hand over to David now to talk about Liverpool UCU and their campaign. After that, we'll have some time to take some questions. So we'll come back to any questions you've asked. Thank you.
Thanks, Nathan. Sorry for typing at the start there, putting you off. I wasn't emailing members even. I was actually asking for a link to be posted, which I hope will come up, which is a link to our video, which I'll talk about just in a second. Yeah, the Defend All Jobs campaign, as Nathan said, we set up largely as a social media campaign, but we tried to use social media also in a way I'll talk about in a minute to kind of activate members. Around 600, we got the figures from our negotiating means that 600 600 contracts would be ended over the summer. And of course, what we anticipate, this is actually not, it's probably a bit larger than previous years, but we, like most of us, we have a very large number of employees whose contracts come to the end in the summer. And of course, we've had, several industrial disputes about this and not really made much headway. But we are kind of thinking about how we make this an issue locally. And clearly, in the context of COVID, we were very clear that this could be used as an excuse not to renew these contracts. Now, Liverpool's a bit different from other universities in the sense that Liverpool explicitly said they would renew contracts where there was work for people as normal. But we suspect, because the decision has devolved to local managers, that wasn't going to be the case. So we're a bit different from some of the other universities who explicitly said they weren't renewing fixed term contracts. But that meant we probably had to put the pressure on even more, because we thought that was going to happen in a de facto way anyway. And I think one of the things we did feel, and this is maybe not the time or the place, but we did feel there needed to be a national pushback and a national campaign, because different universities were saying different things. But of course, the outcome is the same. And that, as I say, that's a discussion for another time. But we felt for a while, I think, that we were kind of going it alone in terms of this strategy of saying those people are going to be made redundant regardless of what you say, unless you show us otherwise. And I guess that was, I'll come back to that being one of our kind of what our aim was, within that kind of broad push. We wanted to combine social media with a presence on campus, and clearly we can't do that right now in terms of the pandemic. So very early on, we decided to have socially distanced protests every week, with a big banner big enough for people to kind of hold and be distanced, a 4 meter wide banner. So we would have 6 people, and we still do every Friday, 6 people on campus holding the banner, making sure that we are using social media to show, okay, this is, and members can join us. Obviously, we have that maximum of 6, but members can join us physically in that campaign. And we are thinking about ways in which, when it's safe, we can build that physical kind of campaigning a bit more. We're about to launch a big mass meeting, and we'll have a series of mass meetings to maintain the momentum on this issue. But the other way of getting members involved in the COVID, under COVID conditions, if you like, was to get them to take selfies. And I do want to say that the banner and the kind of banner you'll see at the top of our Twitter page, if you have a look, and the thing that we were asking, that we were sending out on A4 for people to hold up for their selfies, is all in the same style, and it's a kind of UCU lettering. But we're lucky in all of this, and I know not everyone has access to this, but it's something that we've used a lot. We have a member who is skilled. I won't give away what he does for a day job or anything, but he's very, very skilled in those kind of in design. So we use him to do that. So we got people to hold up the sign with exactly the same branding, if you like, slogan as the banner, and then subsequently as the video. And we got local filmmakers. I don't think Liverpool's unusual. I think most places have increasingly have local people who've got those skills, who are involved in local campaigns, whether it's for other trade unions, the Labour Party, or for Extinction Rebellion, or increasingly there are people that that are around our networks who have those skills. So we were lucky in the sense that the people we got to commission the video had taken a lot of footage of the last strike. So we had a lot of footage of the strike that we were mixing with those selfies and with the footage from the weekly protests. But the important thing about that video was that we timed it to go out on the university's big open day a couple of weeks ago, and of course we used a hashtag that the university used. And without going into the figures, I don't know how the metrics work really on Twitter, but it looked like, to most of us anyway, we were completely dominating the top hits on that hashtag all day. And so that was effective. And I think that's also kind of, one thing that it won't be new to anyone here, but it's not a very difficult thing to do, particularly if you utilize other branches. And I'll come back to talking about that solidarity in a moment. To echo Nathan's point, UCU also amplified what we were doing with the video, and that was really useful to have UCU National pushing that, to have other branches pushing that. We used the university hashtag and we used our own hashtag. Very important that we set up the Defend All Jobs hashtag very early on. So we're not just using our own hashtags, but we're also trying to tap into where the traffic might be, and clearly that's what annoyed the university most. We effectively hijacked deliberately hijacked their hashtag on the open day. We know it's a risky strategy because we know probably some of our members wouldn't want us to disrupt this in kind of terms of recruiting students, but that's a calculation and a balance I think that we have to make. Our priority was to defend our casualised members, and actually we got a very, very kind of quick response from the university. It was clear that once the open day had happened and we were able to go into the public sphere on that kind of basis, we began. Not only did we get a very detailed email about where to take the discussion, but staff were given key details as well, and they gave away some of their cards. Actually, one of the cards they kind of gave away was, they said, well, it cost us 2.5 million to keep every fixed term contract going for the next 6 months. And of course we retaliated by saying, well, that's for a small institution, that's a huge amount of money. For an institution like Liverpool, it's not. I'll talk about that very quickly now, because we kind of had two sets of aims. The first set of aims was to draw out very clear battle lines around casualisation, obviously, and our demand always was to recognise that those people were being made redundant. We didn't quite have the leverage in terms of pushing a legal claim to negotiation through Section 188, but we've always just wanted to get them to the table to take these seriously as job loss. Our second was to push this as a pay equality issue. So we have argued very clearly that the way to deal with this, and we managed to get a lot of data out of the university. I mean, we were pulling teeth. It took us a lot longer than it should have, but we know that if we introduced a 1-to-6 pay ratio at Liverpool with £100,000 salary cap, that would save the university 3.5 million. So we'd cover those fixed term contracts. So the second one was on pay equality. We wanted to really kind of open up and push the agenda on that. Third battle line is on marketisation, and so one of our demands is to freeze capital expenditure. I mean, it's familiar to everyone, but we've also got figures which show that a 5 to 7% cut in planned capital expenditure will pay for those fixed term contracts. And we're going to continue to push those messages and continue to bring this into the public debate. Also on race and gender equality, I mean, we found out that 17% of those losing their contracts were BAME colleagues. So we need to push this also as an issue that's particularly affecting our black colleagues. 53% are women, and in a time where we're expecting people to be looked after, it's just not acceptable to have that level of or that impact of redundancies. So that was the first thing that we tried to do, was to kind of draw out those clear battle lines. The second thing was to bring it into the local public debate, so not just have it within the university. And we're lucky in Liverpool. I won't say too much about this because not everyone's the same, but we've got 4 or 5 local MPs who were on our picket lines, who are not just trade unionists in name, but they're trade unionists in terms of what they do and where their commitments are. So they signed a letter on our behalf. They went into a meeting to question the Vice Chancellor, and actually had the whole senior leadership team. One of them raised a question in Parliament, and we got them to pose with the "Defend All Jobs" slogan for selfies that we publicised, and we've brought it into the local trade union and labour network, spoken at public meetings about the campaign whenever we can, and tried to give it some kind of public visibility as well as visibility inside the university. So I know there's not much time, that we need to have some time for discussion, but I just want to say a couple of things about the outcomes. We haven't won. In fact, it'd be very difficult to know if we had won, because one of the things that we've demanded is data which shows every single one of those contracts ended, what's happened to the people, and we're getting that through in kind of dribs and drabs. So the university, I mean, that's one of our kind of outcomes. We hope in the long term that we will set up a system whereby there is regular reporting of these contracts coming to an end, which then opens up some leverage for us to get into bargaining around those issues. So it's softened up our campaign in the long term. That's all it's done. we have evidence that some jobs have been saved. We know, for example, some people have been put on permanent contracts that we wouldn't necessarily normally expect them, probably should have been anyway, legally, but we wouldn't necessarily expect that. We think we can see some areas where some of our fixed term colleagues have been taken on, but we don't, you know, we don't know. In the long term, this opens up our campaign, and it also allows us to table financial proposals like the 1:6 pay ratio, the freezing on capital expenditure that's going to be at the kind of centre of actually, I think, most of our campaigns for the long term. Advice to other branches: look, that Twitter solidarity is probably more powerful in UCU than HE than in other trade unions, partly because academics are obsessed with Twitter, right? I mean, I think that's part of it. And we have used Twitter much more than the other platforms that Nathan was talking about, and I think we have to go back and kind of look at that. It's not the be all and end all. I would say, think about that kind of hashtag stuff, like, you know, be clever about creating your own campaign branding and so on, but also about seeing where the traffic is and see what's going to embarrass our employers the most, or get into national debates the most, or even bring in local figures like the MPs. And the last thing I'll say is, look, this was never going to be an endpoint for us. We were never going to win this campaign on Twitter. We know that would be ridiculous. But this social media campaign, all it's done is it's kind of opened things up for us, and we see it as a start point rather than an end point. But it will be an end point if we don't get members involved directly, and that's one of the big dangers. You know, we cannot allow social media to kind of be a substitute for direct engagement of members. So that's the next challenge for us. Actually, you know, we've opened things up. How do we keep it on a solid footing? And I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thanks, David. Really helpful, and I think it was really helpful for you to give a kind of larger picture of how the social media stuff you've done has integrated with the wider campaigning, and how negotiations have been playing out, and the kind of knock-on effects it's had with that. So, thanks, and solidarity with Liverpool UCU.
Thank you.
We've only got a few minutes left for me and Claire, but there was one quick question which I thought I might put to you that came up on Facebook. For Nathan, if you could give a very quick answer. Would you recommend branches set up a community map now, or wait until they need it, as it may change over time?
Cheers. I think you want to set up your community maps as early as possible, because you want to make those links as early as possible. It's better to have those links in place before the campaign begins. You always want to think, as well as building workplace power, how you can build community power. And interacting with your community outside of work as much as possible is a really good way to do that. And then you can review it again at the start of the campaign.
Great, thank you very much. So I'm going to say bye to Nathan and David, and thank you very much for those presentations. I'm going to bring in Claire in a moment. Just once she's reactivated her video, but I'm going to basically just give, here she is. We're going to give a really quick taster, really quick, it's going to have to be really quick, of a new service that UCU has been using for the first time. And I think it also responds to a comment that we've just had in about using digital methods for sort of organising purposes, as well as just mobilising people. So, for the autumn, first of all, for the autumn HE ballots in the past year, but then also for a round of ballots in further education as well, we've done a pilot test of a service called ThroughText, which does peer-to-peer messaging. And we're thinking we might want to do a separate session on this, just because it's so new, and it's been so powerful for helping branches get organised for industrial ballots and industrial action. What peer-to-peer texting is it basically allows you, as an activist in your branch, to send text messages to your membership on a massive scale, much faster than you would be able to, and all within our data protection law and UCU's data protection policy. So it's a service that we basically subscribe to within UCU. UCU staff in head office or increasingly in regional offices are able to sort of set it up for you, but it's peer-to-peer in the sense it's branches can text their own members basically. And there are tools that allow you to do it much faster and get the information back from your members and have the conversations much faster than you would through traditional texting or through similar methods that also involve one-on-one conversations like phone banking, door knocking, stuff like that. So what ThroughText basically does is it's been used so far in ballots for us to really speed up the process of checking who has voted, getting information, getting confirmed votes back for those of you who are used to doing that, you know, compiling your spreadsheets in your branches. But it's also been really helpful because what we find when you text people, as opposed to say emailing them or trying to phone them, is that they are much more likely to read the text. About 98% of the texts that we send get opened and read, and they're much more likely to reply. So the average reply rate we were finding when we texted members in branches was over 40%. So you basically end up starting a conversation of some sort with more than 40% of the members you text. And if you compare that with email, you know, when we send an email from head office, or if you send an email in your branch, I would imagine you'll find that response rate is more like, I don't know, 1% or something like that. So it's a really good way for activists to start kind of organic conversations with their membership. And you get people saying things because they're on a more kind of relaxed timetable to respond than they would be if you phoned them or door knocked them. You get people saying things and asking questions. And it starts conversations about the campaign you're doing, about the larger context you're operating in. You know, a lot of people will say, oh, why can't we vote online in these ballots? And so you can explain to them how trade union law works and why it's the law that prevents us from being able to do that, and why that's a problem and why it's really important for us to beat the turnout threshold and things like that. So it's a really good way of communicating with your members. And on that, I'd just like to plug. And Claire is going to talk now for a few minutes about how it works from a member's perspective, because Claire was one of the members who did some of this texting in the initial pilot back in the autumn. Over to you, Claire.
Yeah, hi. I think I've only got about 2 minutes or maybe less.
Yeah, sorry.
So probably brief. So I participated in a pilot of this technology platform back in the autumn of 2019, when we were trying to get people to vote in an industrial action ballot and get over the 50% threshold. And I was so because it was a pilot, I wasn't actually texting people in my own branch, which I imagine might be the better option, but so I was communicating with people in other UCU branches. But even with that, it was a way of making it much more personal. This isn't blast texting. This isn't like a same text to everybody that people can't reply to. Sorry, it comes from you as from Claire, and it comes addressed to the actual person, and it is a standard text, but it's a text to that person, and they can answer to you, and so if they do answer, then you can get into a conversation about the kinds of questions Nick asked, or in it was also maybe if they haven't got their ballot paper, how can they get a replacement ballot? And it was really, really, I mean, and I'd done for that same campaign, I was doing door knocking in my own branch, and I did hours and hours of door knocking. And the level of responses I could get in the time, you know, you could communicate with hundreds of members within a couple of hours. compared to what you can do when you're door knocking. I mean, which obviously there's a different kind of personal contact when you're door knocking. And I think, you know, the text really was helpful. And I was doing it with a small group of people who knew each other a little bit, and we all found we actually really enjoyed it. It was quite addictive. It was quite nice sort of to get all this response, and quite a positive thing to do. And I know a lot of my colleagues, for many good reasons, don't feel confident going door knocking because it's a much more visible thing to do, especially in open plan offices. And this is something they can do much more privately and more successfully, I think.
That's great. Thanks, Claire. I think that's all really true. And the main thing to say is that this is something we're continuing to use and are ready to offer branches during lockdown. And it's becoming increasingly important to us, obviously, as on-campus methods of doing this kind of work are not available and are unsafe. So if you're interested in it, please get in touch. Please get in touch with us. I'm just going to post a link to a longer session that we did at a TUC conference talking about it. So if you want to hear more, that YouTube recording is the best place to start. I think we're going to have to stop there. There are a few questions we've had in, and we'll try to follow up on separately, maybe via the comments or by email. But thank you everyone for listening in. I think you'll agree that was a really useful session. Great to hear from a range of branches and members. This session will be available as a recording on YouTube and Facebook and on Periscope once it's ended. So please go back to it and please share it with your branch and share it on social media. But otherwise, thanks very much everyone for joining in.